G'day friends, my name is Jack aka Carver, and today I have a special treat for you.
And please enjoy it, because it took me a bloody long time to make.
Anyone who knows me well knows my love for video games, and anyone who knows me really well knows that Spyro sits on the pedestal in terms of my favourite game of all time. Are they the best games ever made? Probably not, but there's so much charm and detail in all of them that most people, including myself, can't help but just fall in love with them. So when I heard they were being remade from the ground up, I had a reaction, something a little bit like this. And now with the game being released only a few days ago, I'm here to give you my opinion on it, and it should probably come as no surprise to anyone that I absolutely loved it! This might be a slight exaggeration. The remake by Toys for Bob isn't quite the perfection that some fans wanted, but I'll be damned if they didn't do a good job. The feeling of seeing something so cherished from our childhood remade for the current generation is a feeling that I can't quite put into words. And it's so great to see that whilst playing it, that it holds up to this very day. There's so much love and care put into this that I just can't help but share my thoughts as I go through the experience of playing the remaster. Or the remake if you want to be literal about it. So, before we get started, let me go through a few things. I'm going to do my best to cover the entire trilogy and go into depth on every single level. Obviously this is going to take some time, so I'm only going to point out the things that grab my attention. Also, since I'll be going into quite some depth with these games, if you haven't played the original or the Reignited trilogy and don't want it spoiled for you, go play either version now or both, they're both amazing. Then come back and watch this video. They are absolutely worth the time. Lastly, everything that I have to say about these games is entirely my opinion and is in no way fact. If you disagree, that's fine. If you agree, that's also fine. Every opinion matters. So without further ado, since this video is going to be long enough as it is, let's crack into it with Spyro the Dragon.
Starting off with a little backstory, Spyro the Dragon was a game made for the original PlayStation by a company known as Insomniac Games.
And in case you never heard that name before, they made all of these!
The protagonist is a young purple dragon named Spyro who must free his fellow dragons after being turned to crystal by the main antagonist, Nasty Nork, who teaches us not to be a bully or you'll be encased in crystal for all of eternity.
Besides, he is ugly there, does he?
Spyro has a number of moves all based around the standard traits for Dragon. Pressing the circle button makes him spit fire, pressing and holding square will make him charge, and pressing X after jumping will cause him to glide. The entire game is built around Spyro's abilities, giving you long distances and tall platforms to utilize your gliding ability and to encourage exploration, and giving enemies specific characteristics that determine how you should attack them. Large enemies can't be charged due to their size, so they must be flamed, whereas armored enemies are protected from your flame breath and must be charged. The game also comes up with variations of this, which we'll discuss later. Spyro's main task is to find and save all the crystallized dragons, but he is also tasked with collecting gems in each world. These gems change in color to determine their value and can be found laying around in containers, which, like enemies, depending on their properties, require different methods of breaking them open, sometimes in regards to which move to use and sometimes requiring different collectibles. The game itself is a collectathon mostly based around these two forms of collectibles, as well as dragon eggs, which we'll discuss a little later. And now, after watching the opening cutscene, we start off with our first homeworld, the Artisan's World. Once we gain control of Spyro, we're greeted with a green field surrounded by consisting of castles, a hedge maze, a waterfall, and a small number of sheep, as well as Norks, who are the main enemies in the game as they are Nasty's minions. Directly in front of us is our first dragon... Nestor, who gives us our first task of freeing the dragons before we confront Nasty Nork. On the left, we run into another dragon...
Okay, you got me. I actually never got a chance to play this game as a kid. I played it maybe once or twice with my cousins, but I never actually owned it for myself. For this reason, I don't have a lot of nostalgia for the game, but I played it when I was a teenager, and I've played it quite a few times since, and I still have heaps of love for it as I do with the other games in the trilogy.
Anyways, the next dragon we run into is Delbin, who tells us about the dragonfly following us around, Sparks. Sparks has two functions in the game. He's able to pick up gems for you, but mainly he functions as your health. Every time you get hit, he changes color, from his standard yellow to blue to green to disappearing entirely. If you get hit again, you lose a life. But personally, the main fault of not having Sparks to me is the frustration of having to walk over gems to pick them up. To heal Sparks, you need to flame or charge various small animals called fodder that release butterflies that Sparks can eat to regain health. As previously stated, also in the levels are enemies known as Norks. When they're attacked, they'll drop gems. These enemies respawn, however, either from Spyro dying or re-entering a world you've already visited, and if they're defeated again, they'll instead drop silver orbs. Collect enough of these orbs and Spyro earns a life. You can also find containers in levels that hold silver dragon figures that will give you a life. There are 5 portals in this world that will lead you to different levels, and a balloonist that will take you to the next world once you've rescued enough dragons. From here, we'll look over to the Reignited version, and oh my god, this game is pretty! Whilst the level itself is more or less the same, the graphics graphics upgrade is extremely clear. A lot of detail has been put into things such as the castles surrounding the level, the enemies, the dragons, pretty much everything. Spyro himself looks amazing and is a much more vibrant shade of purple than the original. Sparks have been given legs and also droops down depending on the amount of damage you've taken. And of course the grass burns when Spyro breathes fire. The level of detail here is awesome. Spyro's moveset and idle animations are mostly the same, with the addition of being able to push in the left thumbstick to have sparks direct you to the nearest gems, a feature that was implemented in the second game. The right analog stick can now control your camera as opposed to the L2 and R2 buttons in the original, but you can change the setting in the options menu just in case this is your preferred way of playing. A big notable difference is that all the dragons are unique in appearance, which is easily one of the best features of this game. Also, the voice actor from Spyro 2 and 3, Tom Kenny of SpongeBob fame, voices Spyro in all 3 Reignited games, as opposed to Spyro's original Spyro 1 voice actor, Carlos Alazraqui.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him.
The Artisan's World is a brilliant way to kick off the game, and with that, let's head on to our first level, Stone Hill. Stone Hill is one of my favourite opening levels in gaming, simply because of how well it shows off the exploration aspect of Spyro the Dragon. The level is a hilly field surrounded by stone walls and castles with a well you can jump down, a hidden beach, and easily my favourite part, the hilly landscape you can glide to from one of the towers. Whilst it's all within the boundaries of the level, it gave this out of bounds feeling that was extremely appealing to me and most people who played this game. Upon reaching these hills, you will hear this lovely noise. These lovable little bastards are egg thieves. They've stolen dragon eggs, which act as your third collectible, and damn are they fast. You need to charge after them to catch them and will run into them many times throughout the game.
And don't worry, the taunting doesn't get annoying. Not at all.
But not as annoying as looking around for 2 bloody gems that I missed.
Enemies out to kill you include rams that charge at you and shepherds that try to whack you with their crooks. I'm sorry for how that sounds. It's also probably worth noting that Spyro can't swim in this game, so avoid the water at all costs. The Reignited version of Stone Hill has added banners to the castle to add a little bit of colour and detail. In the distance are trees and more castles to help the level feel more expansive. There are also a few things that become quickly noticeable in this level in regards to the music. The original soundtrack was composed by Stuart Copeland, famously known as the drummer for the rock band The Police, as well as with contribution from Ryan Beveridge for the third game. The Reignited soundtrack was adapted and re-recorded by Toys for Bob employee Stefan Vankov. And with these re-recordings, the music for each level now adapts to what is taking place in the game. If you don't move, the music becomes very distant and quiet. When you're inside a building, cave, or other closed off area, the music becomes heavily reverberated. And when you're charging, extra percussion is added.
I'll mention this soundtrack more when it becomes notable, but I just want to say that overall I think Stefan did a pretty good job considering what a difficult task he was given.
As I said before, the new version of Stone Hill is pretty faithful to the original, so with that, we'll move on to Dark Hollow. This level is similar to Stone Hills in design, as it takes place in an area closed off by stone walls and castles hiding a hilly field outside of the level. Instead of exploring the outside boundaries in this level, we explore the depths of the castle interior and are introduced to the first violent Nork enemies. The smaller Norks carry metal shields that can only be charged, and the larger Norks carrying clubs who are too large to charge must be flamed. There's even a variation of this larger Nork who wears steel armor on their fronts. They will mock you and point out their armor before turning away from you. At this point, you can flame their unprotected backs to defeat them. On top of this, there are campfires at the end of the level that Spyro can light. They don't work as any sort of challenge or necessary task, but it's a nice small detail that brings the level to life. Again, the Reignited variation of the level is quite faithful to the original design, however bookshelves have been added to represent that this homeworld is the home of very intelligent and peaceful dragons. For this reason, the dragons throughout Artisans have been modelled as different kinds of trade workers to show off their creative traits. It's an extremely nice level of detail that Toys for Bob have delved into. Also worth noting is that the torches in the level have now been used as a means for an achievement, so that's also a nice touch. Now, let's head into Town Square. As the name suggests, this level takes place in the center of a town filled with raging bulls and bullfighter orcs. This is one of the first levels that encourages exploration through gliding, as there are many gaps to clear and you're also able to find a high enough platform to glide to the level's boundary where you can find an egg thief. A few notable facts with the enemies is that in some versions of the game, the tips of the bull's horns are red, which was removed from later versions of the game as it resembled blood. Also, these bulls will humorously chase after the bullfighters. There are quite a few touches of humor added to the Spyro games to add to its charm, including a dragon who gets quite worked up about the egg thief in the level.
Spyro, did you see a man dressed in blue running around here? He's a thief, and he's stolen a dragon egg. You've got to track him down and get that egg. Run! Run! I'm getting a little winded.
This is also our first encounter with one of many dragons who says,
Thank you for releasing me.
The Reignited trilogy is more or less the same. Of course, it's a stunning recreation, but they pretty much all are, so I won't waste time saying that for every level. However, there are banners hanging throughout the level, and some of the lights and windows are switched on to make the level feel more like a living and breathing town than the original did. The dragons have the same things to say, however, the thank you for releasing me dragon has been given extra dialogue referring to the guidebook, a feature brought over from 2 that tells you your progress in each level. Also, the Winded Dragon's line is approached slightly differently, in a way that's still humorous, but slightly less than the original in my opinion.
You've got to track him down and get that egg! Run! Run! I'm getting a little winded.
Also, the balls have retained the bright red tips on their horns, a fact I'm quite happy about. Next, we have our first boss level, Toasty. Before we get into the boss, I just want to point out how cool the portal is seeing the dragon head open up. Sticking with the theme of the world, Toasty takes place on a mountain or an island. I don't know, PS1 graphics, man. Which features green fields and castle interiors. The shepherds return as enemies, this time accompanied by Is it just me, or are these dogs really intimidating? You flame them once and it just pisses them off as they come bounding towards you, meaning you have to attack them twice.
These dogs are the real bosses of Toasty, people.
Toasty himself is a large scarecrow-looking dude with a scythe who sends dogs to attack you and...
Did I see that right?
So yeah, it turns out that Toasty is just a sheep on stilts.
But regardless, we're gonna crack into this boss fight. Let's go.
Yeah, 1 hit down. Awesome, that's 2. Yes, there's 3, and we've beaten Toasty.
Woo! Okay, yeah, the bosses suck.
It's not so much that they're badly designed or uninteresting or anything like that, it's just that most of them are ridiculously easy. This is a common problem with Spyro to me, and also a problem that was present in the original Crash Bandicoot games. But to be fair, they improve from here, so I'll give it the benefit of the doubt for now. This was one of the earliest levels people got to see of the Reignited trilogy, and the paintings added to the main interior are a nice touch to give the level a little bit more detail. The dogs have been made hairier, and in my opinion have been made a lot less intimidating. You still need to react quickly to them, but I don't get any terror from them bounding towards me in the way the original did. Toasty, however, I think looks amazing, and I love the expression of the sheep's face as it pokes his head out of its cloak. Also, the added achievement for not getting hit by him makes the boss slightly more of a challenge, but at the end of the day, he never even tried to attack me, so unfortunately the boss is still laughably easy. This is a change that wouldn't have upset me, but I'm sure the majority of Spyro fans will be happy with the faithfulness here. Also, once again, the Dragon Head portal is still incredible to look at. After finishing Toasty, that wraps up the first world.
Yep, definitely no more levels. Not at all.
From here we go to see the balloonist, who congratulates us on our progress and will take us to the next world. In the Reignited trilogy, the balloonist even has a voice actor, which is neither here or there for me. I really wouldn't call it a good or a bad addition.
I see you've been busy rescuing dragons, Spyro.
Anyways, talking to him takes us to our next world, Peacekeepers. The Peacekeepers world is a canyon with rivers of purple ooze-like substance. The canyon is filled with soldier Norks firing cannons who have a funny animation of trying to get back up as they're defeated. Other types of Norks will run away from Spyro into tents as he gets close. Flaming these tents will reveal the orcs who will either cower from Spyro or... The cannons used by the Norks can also be used by Spyro to attack enemies, obtain gems, and even destroy a part of the terrain. Whilst the level's a little bit bland in terms of things to see, I personally love it for the charm of the enemies and how they interact with each other in Spyro. It's definitely up there as one of my favourite homeworlds in the trilogy. I also want to add that I absolutely love the remastered version of this world. The canyon is gorgeously brightened up, the grass is a nice small addition, and I love the stacked weaponry around the entrance. The colour of the Norks is a bit odd initially, but it makes sense to match them to the colours of the other Norks in the game. Another great aspect is, again, the theming of the dragons. As I said before, all the dragons are fighters, soldiers, warriors, and they've been modelled to properly appear that way. Once again, there's a lot of small details added to this that makes me really enjoy the Reignited version of this level. Also, the Norks still moon you, which I honestly thought might not have made it into the new game. From here, we'll head on to Dry Canyon. This level takes place both in and on top of a large canyon with a decent variety of enemies. Firstly, you have Norks carrying guns and shields, meaning they must be charged carefully, vultures who fly at Spyro, and finally large Norks who appear to be bird keepers at first, but then promptly start wielding a vulture like a club. I've got to say, the enemies in this world always make me laugh. Another funny moment is this particular dragon.
Is that you, Spyro? Are you the young dragon I've been hearing so much about? Ever since you're a wee puff of smoke, we've known,
You've known?
I forget.
Love it. The emphasis of this level is largely on gliding long distances to reach far off platforms and is one of the many levels that utilizes Spyro's gliding brilliantly. The level has had a similar treatment to Peacekeepers in the Reignited trilogy, so there isn't really much that needs pointing out. However, I will take this opportunity to point out a few things I noticed while playing the level. For one, the egg thieves are now trickier to catch due to their paths being more smoothed out than the original, meaning they won't suddenly dart towards you for an easy kill. Also, the gliding in Spyro the Dragon has been made much more forgiving, and if Spyro barely misses a ledge, he'll do a slight flutter to reach the platform he's glided to. Whilst this does make the game easier, it does make some of the more frustrating glides much more bearable, so I don't really love or hate the change. Since there's not really much else to point out, let's move on to Cliff Town. Despite the obvious difference in scenery, Cliff Town is a level very similar to Stone Hill in terms of its focus on exploration and being able to reach an out-of-bounds-like area. The level is, as the name suggests, a town on the edge of a cliffside. The tops of the buildings can be glided to by reaching the highest points in the game, the large building at the end of the level, and the cliff the level is named after. From said large building, you'll be able to reach the cliff, which makes up another out-of-bounds style area, which is populated by the vultures from Dry Canyon. Otherwise, the level consists of large women with cooking pots hiding gems inside, who will send out steel-cloaked enemies carrying knives ready to shank you in a dark alleyway. This level is essentially the go-to when explaining the way gliding is utilized in the game for the amount of distance you can cover and the different areas to explore. Whilst the level is mostly the same in the Reignited trilogy, this is a perfect example to discuss the draw distance in the game. The original Spyro trilogy was notorious for the fact that it would drop or raise the quality of textures in the level depending on distance that you're looking at them from. This allowed for levels to look huge without using ridiculous amounts of memory and really got a lot out of the hardware the original PlayStation had to offer. Another fun fact is that gems will still sparkle in the distance, meaning that despite them being invisible, you can still see where they were located from far away. In the Reignited trilogy, the stronger console obviously allows for greater render distance, and it really shows off its beauty with Cliff Town. Seeing the large building landscape in the distance from the start of the level is quite breathtaking, and this is present in quite a few levels to come as well. Another fun addition in the game is how the fodder reacts to Spyro rather than simply walking around aimlessly. The lizards in this level will actually hiss at Spyro. There's not much else to say about this level, so we'll head on to Ice Cavern. This level is extremely interesting due to the reverse nature compared to its homeworld, being an ice-themed level rather than a desert-themed, and the layout of the level itself. Directly behind where you begin the level, you can glide to a stack of lives, which is actually just next to the end of the level, essentially meaning you can complete the level backwards.
Or you can be a complete idiot like me and accidentally jump through the portal, meaning you have to let the game load and then go back to the portal.
The Norks in this level are appropriately snow-themed, including enemies on skis, enemies that throw snowballs, and interestingly a variation of the larger enemies clad in iron armor that must be repeatedly charged until they're knocked off the edge. The level is a nice contrast to everything we've experienced before and is quite pleasant to look at. And speaking of pleasant to look at, check this out. This level is absolutely gorgeous and Reignited. Seeing the buildings and the cave sides, looking out into the distance through the cracks in the walls, even the texture of the ice, everything is stunning to witness. The level also seems to be a tad darker to further establish you're in a cave. There aren't any other major changes worth noting, but I found the look of this level a huge highlight of the game. Though in regards to the original, I have to wonder who on the design team decided that the Norks should wear scarves and hats and yet have no shirts on in the freezing cold. From here we move on to our first flight level, Night Flight. Flight levels are levels where Spyro earns the ability of flight and must destroy or fly through various obstacles in a certain time limit. In Night Flight, you must fly through rings, break chests, fly through arches, and flame large lights. Beating these challenges will earn you gems, and the only way to earn all the gems is to complete everything in a single run. The level itself consists of large crystals, castles, and the lights mentioned earlier, which resemble lighthouses. There are also fairies along the path that direct you when a tight turn appears. Here is the perfect time for me to talk about one of my major gripes with the Reignited trilogy. Certain movement mechanics have been made more realistic, which might seem like a good thing, but causes some major gameplay issues, at least in my opinion. The flight mechanics are heavier than the original, and Spyro takes a decent amount of time to make certain movements, specifically trying to fly up or down, and makes downward descent much more dangerous, as very often Spyro will fail to pull up in time before crashing into the water. There are other instances of this, but I'll mention them as they appear. In terms of the level, it's again quite faithful to the original, however the vibrancy of the crystals are absolutely worth noting. The only major change worth noting is the punk rock appearance of the fairies. It's another choice I don't really have an opinion on, but it's an interesting choice for sure. And now we finish our Peacekeepers with the next boss level, Dr. Shemp. The level reverts to the canyon desert theme of the homeworld, and before the confrontation with Dr. Shemp, Spyro runs into the large women from Cliff Town, this time accompanied by armored creatures who sprint directly at Spyro and will even run off the side of the cliff if not attacked.
And I've got to admit, I always found the noises they made quite funny.
Dr. Shemp himself is a large yellow shaman wearing armor on his front and carrying a staff. By this point of the game, I think it's clear what needs to be done. During the 3 stages of the battle, Dr. Shemp will do different attacks that will all end him in exposing his back. When this happens, you can flame his back. Do this 3 times and Dr. Shemp will be defeated. There's only one real difference in the Reignited trilogy worth pointing out, and that's Dr. Shemp himself. In the original game, he appeared to be a different creature from what we'd seen before, possibly a creature similar to the large women featured in the level. In the Reignited trilogy, he's been changed to a Nork.
Now, there isn't much of a nostalgia factor influencing my opinion here, and it's, again, not really a change that I have too much of a problem with, but I can see fans of the original game having big issues with this. There are some changes made in 2 and 3 that really bothered me, and I think that was largely because of the nostalgia I have for the game. So, again, I understand why people might not like this change.
And before we head off to the next world, I just want to say how impressive and intimidating the Eclipse is in the Reignited version of this level. After visiting the next balloonist, we're taken to Magic Crafters, which is situated on the mountaintops, meaning plenty of opportunities to fall off the mountainside. The world's design is both epic in scope and elegant in its interior. The enemies consist of wizards and druids who attack Spyro with spells and different elements, or shift the landscape to hinder his movement. The world and its levels are also heavily occupied by egg thieves, with eggs being the main collectible in these levels. The level also contains our first supercharge path, but since we'll be using one in an upcoming level beforehand, I'll talk about that a little bit later. At this point, I feel like Toys for Bob really nailed the homeworld designs. The updated graphics make the mountains look much more grand and realistic, really selling the epic nature of the world that PS1 graphics didn't quite capture for me. Also, I just want to point out a few things about this level in both versions of the game. This is one of many cases where Insomniac had lined up enemies specifically to be charged in a single motion, which is admittedly very satisfying. There's even an achievement for it in this version of the game. Also, the spinning top gem chests have a great feature where flaming them will spin the top off, and if aimed correctly, will take out a nearby enemy. These are placed specifically in this level to help take out out-of-reach druids, which again is extremely satisfying. From here, let's head into Alpine Ridge. The level is similarly themed to Magic Crafters in the sense that it takes place in the mountaintops as well as tall spires situated around it. The druids and wizards still make up the main enemies in the level, with the druids constantly halting your progress until they're defeated. Also on this level are huge yellow beasts who I found quite shocking the first time I played this level for their size alone. This is a level designed around precise gliding, with Spyro traversing over numerous chasms filled with blue ooze or nothing at all. The Reignited adaptation of this level maintains the same added texture as the homeworld, with more castles in the distance and extravagant architecture surrounding the platforms Spyro must glide to. I found the surrounding mountains makes the level seem much less isolated. That could be viewed as a positive or a negative, but I quite like the change in atmosphere it creates. It's also worth noting that the new world theme for the dragons has inspired some of the most interesting designs yet, making freeing each one a treat. There's not much more to add to this level, so we'll move on to High Caves.
I wonder what the point of this level is.
Again, we have a level based on exploration. It might be getting repetitive for me to mention it, but it really is one of the aspects that makes this game so good. We begin by heading in one of two directions. Heading left will pit us against a number of wizards as well as druids that are once again shifting the landscape, making for a particular platforming section that I always found quite memorable for how tense I used to find it. Heading right will take us face to face with... What the absolute is that? Why are there nightmare fuel metal spiders in this level?
Now, I might not have played this game as a kid, but that did not stop this thing from scaring the hell out of me on my first encounter.
To top it all off, these spiders are pretty much invincible for the time being, so it looks like we'll have to take the long way around. After completing the platforming section I mentioned earlier, we are taken to an area consisting of a large ramp towards the High Caves the stage is named after. Below is a bottomless pit, however, roaming this pit are a group of fairies that will catch Spyro if he falls. The reason for this is the level is home to our first supercharge ramp. Yes, we saw one earlier, but this is often the first time people will use it. By charging along these arrows, Spyro will start to spin his legs Sonic the Hedgehog style and dramatically pick up in speed. From this ramp, Spyro is encouraged to jump and glide to best explore the caves. However, the supercharge can also be used to take out the spiders from earlier, though it can be a bit tricky due to the high speeds you have to try and control at the same time. Instead, I would recommend getting as far into the caves as you can and making your way to the end, because once you do, you're greeted with a solitary fairy who will give you a kiss. After this, you'll be gifted with the power of a super flame, which is strong enough to break through steel, meaning we can finally show these spiders who's boss. This level is probably my favorite in Magic Crafters just because of the amount of variety present. There are some new mechanics as well as a brilliant representation of what make the existing mechanics so great. In the Reignited trilogy, this level is still one of my favorites, however I do prefer it less than the original. This isn't for any reason of graphics or music or anything of that sort, but more the mechanics of the game. Trying to get into the spider caves with the supercharge became quite tricky for me due to two things. Firstly, Spyro's turns feel a bit wider than the original, and if you're holding forward when you charge, it severely limits your turning ability. This isn't really too big a fault of the game, more that it was a habit from the original game that I had to break in order to get the most out of the controls. The other half to this, which is my main gripe, is that the camera is zoomed in on Spyro a decent amount more than the original. For this reason, it can be extremely difficult to judge the amount of turning you need to do or see what's coming up next. This all made the supercharged portion of the level less satisfying for me. However, everything else about the level I found to be great. Two changes I noticed worth mentioning are the character models of the spiders and the fairies. The spiders are as creepy as ever, losing the beetle-like features that it had in the original for Spider Fangs. This design is just as creepy to me and I really like it. The fairies have all been given unique appearances from this point, which is a nice change from the simple color palette change in the original game. The biggest change that I noticed at this point, however, is the way Spyro's skin changes color to a particular pattern whenever he gets a power-up. If someone had told me this without showing me, I might have been a bit concerned, but seeing it now, I absolutely love this addition, and made finding the Super Flame Fairy all that much more satisfying.
But not as satisfying as destroying the spiders.
Mechanics aside, the beauty and variety in this level remains, and I still have a lot of love for it. After making our way through the supercharged portion of Magic Crafters, we arrive at our
second
flight level, Crystal Flight.
Or in the Reignited trilogy, successfully supercharging through the caves to get the gems, only to accidentally turn too hard into Wizard Peak, warning that I have to go through the level and make it way back to get the flight.
And unfortunately, I always found this level pretty disappointing. Flight levels are fun and I always look forward to them, but aesthetically, this level is extremely similar to Night Flight, with the crystals surrounding the level and the only different collectible being planes instead of lighthouses. The Reignited trilogy manages to add a bit of flair to the level again with the vibrancy of the crystals and adding castle towers into the level layout, but at the end of the day, the level is still all too similar to Night Flight for me personally. There's not really much else worth pointing out, so let's head on to Wizard's Peak. This is the first level that really gave me trouble on my first playthrough due to new mechanics and well-hidden areas. This level features a heavy amount of large wizards as well as a return of large Norks that have been magically summoned into the level. The new feature of this level is the multiple supercharge ramps, which must be chained together to get an even bigger boost to make some fire-off jumps. It took me a long time to figure this out for the first time I experienced it. On top of that, there is a wizard standing on a platform overlooking one of the interior areas who seems impossible to reach, and the only indication of how to get there is by looking around a corner off a cliff to see the very edge of this platform. This was extremely tricky to find, but not impossible, and I love that about this level. Unfortunately, I was a bit let down by the Reignited version of the level. The mechanics weren't too big of an issue this time around, as the turns were clear and wide enough for me to not crash often. However, this hidden platform is now completely hidden from view. Even though I just played the original game in preparation for this, I still had trouble finding it, and if you didn't know where it was, your only real indication is sparks pointing in that direction. From there, you basically have to take a leap of faith to reach it. It's not so much a big problem, but it definitely makes it unnecessarily tricky in my opinion. Now, before we head on to the boss level, there's one dragon at the end of this level I'd like to point out.
Listen carefully, Spyro. There's a secret area in the artisan's home world near the waterfall. Try jumping on the stones there.
So it turns out there's a secret level in the first world. This was a happy surprise for me when I first played this, especially since I was enjoying flight levels so much. So on that note, let's head back to Artisan so we can check out Sunny Flight. Now this is what I was hoping for from a new flight level. This flight level takes place in the sunny Artisan setting, revolving around a train track that runs through an island with a few crystals scattered here and there. This level is vibrant, green, and the sunlight is a nice change of pace. The whole level is just cheerful to witness. In this level, we must destroy barrels carried by trains, fly through arches, flame planes, and destroy chests. This flight level isn't overly difficult, but it's one of my favorites due to the setting alone. And it only gets better in the Reignited trilogy. The greenery and detail in this level really makes it stand out, and is essentially everything I loved about the original level, only amplified. I also love how the train conductors will shake their fists at Spyro as he approaches them. It's great stuff. Now let's finish up Magic Crafters with the boss level, Blowhard.
Boss.
Now, this level is a quite mixed bag for me. Again, we're greeted by druids and wizards who I'm quite overseeing at this point, and the boss himself is a variation of the whirlwind enemies we've seen previously. An interesting thing about this boss is that you fight him as the level progresses rather than in a final confrontation at the end of the level. Now, I kind of like this idea, but it's kind of negated by the fact that he is stupidly easy to defeat. He spends a lot of time sitting there not attacking you, meaning it's extremely easy to defeat him without taking a hit or even getting attacked in the first place.
So yeah, there are things I like and dislike about the boss, but I think it's worth pointing out that this level is home to one of my favorite dragons in the game.
Thanks for releasing me, Spyro. You have no idea how long I've been trapped in crystal. And, neither do I. Who are you again?
I'm out of here.
In the Reignited trilogy, Toys for Bob have added a thematic element in the background by adding windmills to the surrounding area. It also helps in making the level feel a bit more grand in scope, as the mountains have appeared in a few levels now, so I really like this addition. An odd aspect that I noticed is that the colors in this level have been saturated slightly. It doesn't so much look bad, but since I didn't notice this anywhere else, it was a little bit jarring. Blowhard looks awesome, but is still extremely easy to defeat, so with that, we'll visit the balloonist and make our way to fan favorite homeworld, Beastmakers. It took some time for me to properly appreciate this level. Upon my first playthrough, I found the swampy area a bit bland to look at, but over time I've grown to love the aesthetic of the gloomier nature of the homeworld. The Norks that electrocute the ground and the warthogs that charge at you also make for some tricky enemies based around timing your movement, which is always a great basis for an enemy. The pyramids and giant trees present in the level all sound odd on paper, but add to the landscape brilliantly, making for a unique and interesting homeworld. I also love that the Norks are jamming out to music on their headphones. Another interesting fact is the accent used by the dragons.
To avoid offending anyone, I won't try to guess what it is.
Nasty Nork is turning our swamp into an electrified junk heap. And it used to be so beautiful.
Now, I have to say without a doubt that Beastmakers and its levels are easily my favorite in the Reignited trilogy. The swamp has been brought to life, and it's amazing how beautiful something so gross and gloomy has become. The huts and towers surrounding the world are nicely detailed, as is the electrical pattern made by the Norks, and being able to see the forestation that stretches out through the swamp is absolutely breathtaking. Also love the addition of the warthog statue. There's so much appeal in this redesign. It was at this point I was pretty much sold on Toys for Bob's take on Spyro the Dragon. Our first level is Terrace Village, which consists of buildings made out of what appears to be brick and straw. Surrounding the village are a number of electric-themed Norks. The previously shown Norks who electrocute the floor below, large Norks carrying rods, and more smaller Norks in small tanks that shoot electricity. Of all the Beastmaker worlds, it most resembles its homeworld, and once again emphasizes the use of Spyro's glide ability. It's also home to a certain fan-favorite dragon.
Good job, Spyro. One day you'll be able to tell all the dragons about your amazing adventures.
This is another level that greatly benefits from the updated graphics. The extra level of detail on the houses, the interior design, and the surrounding area, now small ponds of swamp water that suddenly drops off a cliff, once again just makes the level feel alive. There's only so much PS1 graphics were capable of, and the fact the level was a village felt somewhat wasted due to the limited design of the surrounding houses, but here it's much more believable. I'm also going to use the same cutscene of Cyprin to show off the different approach to Spyro's voice acting. In the original, Spyro sounds grossed out, whereas in the Reignited trilogy, Spyro sounds almost afraid.
Sure, but what I'd really like to do is get out of this swamp.
Sure, but what I'd really like to do is get out of this swamp.
I wonder if this was a conscious decision or just how Kenny was approaching the character.
There are quite a few changes like this throughout the game that really change up Spyro's personality, which was a major complaint in the first game as people found him cocky and unlikable. The next level we're going to take a look at is Misty Bog. I want to start off by saying that this is one of my favorite levels in the game, simply because of how damn difficult it can be. There are quite a few enemies present, including the Norks from the homeworld, now wielding knives and shields, who funny enough are trying to capture the level's fodder in wooden cages, warthogs, plants that come alive to eat you, and one other enemy that I'll let Roscoe describe for you.
Be on the lookout for attack frogs. They are cold-blooded killers.
In all seriousness though, these attack frogs are no joke. These guys can attack you with their tongues from a decent distance away, so if you don't charge them head on, they'll definitely get a hit on you, and even then sometimes they manage to beat you to the first attack. This all comes to a head in a single cavern where a number of Norks and attack frogs gang up on you, and I can't tell you how many times I died here, just trying to capture this footage.
If you're thinking that I can just roll back the footage and count that, then aren't you a smarty pants?
The level itself takes place on platforms made of land, tree stumps, and structures, all surrounded by dark swamp water. The skybox is a simple grey shade of mist from which the level is named after. Also, just want to point out another dragon that always entertained me was fan favorite Bubba.
I'll tell you what to do with those creatures. Smash them, Spyro! Stamp them out and squish them and squash them!
The level is more or less the same in the Reignited trilogy, but the attack frogs seem to be much easier to handle. This is the first decision I encountered that really disappointed me because what was one of the harder levels in the game has been toned down quite a bit in difficulty, making the game a tad too easy for my liking. Another change I'm not particularly fond of is the way Bubba performs his signature line.
I'll tell you what to do with those creatures. Smash them, Spyro! Stamp them out and squish them and squash them!
I just find he doesn't have that same aggression that made it so entertaining for me. But regardless of all this, I must say that the level does look gorgeous. The mist has been kept in the background, but you can faintly see islands and trees in the distance to make the level feel a tad less isolated while still keeping to the theme that was originally intended. Also, gliding to the platforms above the waterfall is pretty spectacular in this version of the game. Our next level is Wild Flight, and I honestly think this is my favorite flight level in the game. It was easily the most challenging to me, and I personally love the industrial design that it follows. The level features boats, arches, planes, and chests, and involves accurate flying to manage to fly through arches and destroy boats at the same time without crashing into the water below. The redesign of the level is absolutely fantastic, and it's still a lot of fun to play, but the more realistic flight controls make this level much more difficult. That might seem like a stupid complaint considering I just made the opposite about Misty Bog, but I always always found that Misty Bog was justifiably difficult. The flight mechanics in this level I just found frustrating more than anything, as very often you'd attempt to pull up out of a quick descent only to not have enough time to reposition yourself and simply crash into the water below. Also, unless my memory is failing me, I found that Spyro tends to thump into the sides of walls much more easily than he did in any of the other games, which was another frustrating aspect for me.
And I hope you enjoy me complaining about the game mechanics, because now we're going to head into treetops.
As the name suggests, this level takes place on top of giant trees where dragons have made their homes. There is very little connecting these treetops, and the main method of traversing the level is by using the supercharge ramps to launch yourself and glide to where you want to go. Enemies of the level are made up of, honestly, I don't even know. One of which will kick you if you get too close while the others throws bananas at you, making me assume they're meant to be some form of monkey or ape. This level also has 2 egg thieves, however this time they are carrying gems. They also make use of the supercharge ramps and end their escape in seemingly unreachable spots, both requiring precise supercharge combination. For this reason, Treetops is often considered to be the trickiest level in the whole game, possibly the whole trilogy.
And to be fair, getting to the second spot is ridiculously complicated, so I'm going to show you the path right now.
The fact that this challenge is present in a kid's game is pretty odd to me, but nevertheless I always enjoyed the challenge it added to a relatively easy game.
And I must say, as tiring as capturing the gameplay for this was, I'm so happy I did, because if I hadn't, I probably would have had to throw my controller out the window.
Now, of course, the new supercharge controls paired with the camera were a problem for me, but the real issue I found was one that I'm thankful I didn't have to deal with too much. The real issue with this level is the load times. The load times are quite hefty, which is a small price to pay when loading levels due to how fantastic the game is.
However, the loading times when you respawn are far longer than they should be. If I hadn't memorized the path by this point, then I would have had to wait nearly a minute every time I died, which in the original game was a lot. This just adds an unnecessary level of frustration, and I really hope that this is addressed in an update or a patch or something, because this is really a problem.
I must say, however, outside of these glaring issues, this level is another example of why Beastmakers is my favorite world in the first game of the Reignited trilogy. Seeing more treetops in the distance and seeing all the far off areas to explore in high definition is breathtaking. Also, the enemies in this level are much easier to distinguish, clearly having an ape-like design to them. Once again, I'm just lucky I'd gone through this level beforehand, or I feel like it could have ruined my experience with it in the Reignited trilogy. And with that, we finish off the Beastmakers world with the boss level Metalhead. The level is a castle in the midst of the swamp, with swamp water running through it almost like a sewer. One of the main secrets in the level involves a broken metal gate for the water to run through that Spyro can fit through. The main enemies are the apes from Treetops, however the smaller apes are now clad in metal armor. The larger apes will even fling them at you from time to time. As you delve into the castle depths, you encounter Metalhead, a giant robot who throws apes at you and blasts you with electricity. He's also protected and powered by steel rods that Spyro must charge and destroy in order to defeat him. In the Reignited trilogy, the level is designed to look quite run down. There are dead tree branches surrounding the castle walls and the windows are boarded up. The electrical theme of the boss has also been spread around the level, including his head above the castle entrance. Metalhead himself looks incredible. Rather than his original clunky design, he looks imposing and threatening. Probably my favorite boss redesign so far. As I said before, taking everything in this world that I've pointed out, Beastmakers is easily my favorite world in the first game, in both versions, but particularly the Reignited trilogy. After seeing the balloonist, we move on to our next homeworld, Dreamweavers.
This world is bizarre.
Dreamweavers takes place amongst castles on top of floating islands. This world is home to creatures of dreams that have come to life, and as such, this world is home to some of the most inventive and strange creatures we've seen so far. Straight off the bat, we're introduced to creatures known as monks, who come in standard and armored variations. Off in the distance, one of these monks is shooting a cannon that changes the sizes of the other monks, making them quite grotesque. Also, I want to point out that I love the sound the larger armored monk makes. Also present in this world are fools. The fools are invincible, but nevertheless Spyro must
Blame the fool.
to activate their powers, whether it be to raise platforms or drop lanterns. This homeworld is a very close second for me in terms of my favorite from the original game, simply because I love how wacky and weird it is. In the Reignited trilogy, Dreamweavers turns into something out of DreamWorks or Disney. Everything is gorgeous and cartoonish and just reeks of charm. The funny noise made by the armored monks is gone, but This is more than made up for by the bizarre dance the standard monks do. The fools also further resemble the jesters they are modeled after, but unfortunately lose that sound they make.
Sure, it was annoying, but it also had a nice charm to it.
The castles look amazing as always, and it's awesome to see clouds and more floating islands off in the distance. The first world we're going to head into is Haunted Towers. The world takes place in and around a huge castle filled with grenade-wielding Norks and wizards who bring to life sets of iron armor. These suits of armor are invincible and require Spyro to visit the numerous fairies around the level who gift him the Super Flame power. With this power, he can destroy the said suits of armor. The level continues along this way in a mostly linear fashion, but eventually you can find a supercharge ramp. Using this ramp, you can make your way to the other side of the castle where you must race up a staircase while a wizard attempts to bring armor to life to stop you. If you can get to the top in time, Spyro will find a final fairy whose kiss gifts Spyro with unlimited Super Flame for the rest of the level, meaning he can easily clean up all the suits of armor and get their gems. This was a really fun and rewarding power up to find, and a tricky one at that, making this one of my favorite levels. Also, the fact that the suits of armor use their own heads as weapons is always pretty funny. Speaking of the suits of armor, I love the green ghostly body that they have in the Reignited trilogy. It somehow makes them more intimidating in my opinion. It also adds to the humor once they remove their heads to try to hit you with them. I also only just noticed here that steel or gold objects reflect Spyro when he gets close to them, which is a brilliant detail that I always appreciate in games. I also want to point out that the theme of the dragons in this world are mostly dragons preparing for bed, which made me laugh a little bit. And a final detail I want to point out is that the model for the final fairy in the level was changed up, which is a relief as I was concerned that it would just be a reskin or simply the same model altogether.
Not that it didn't happen at all through this trilogy, but that's a discussion for another video.
I could also go on all day about the exterior and interior design and how pretty they are, but for the sake of time, let's move on to Dark Passage. This level takes place in a series of structured caves, which are mainly occupied by cute dogs and turtles. Oh my god, what the... So yeah, there are fools in this level that carry lanterns. When they put their lanterns out, the once cute creatures suddenly become hulking nightmare fuel monsters. And to support these demon spawn critters, there are also demonic cupids hanging around as well.
So this level's off to a fantastic start.
All jokes aside, this is another great level that encourages exploration. The night setting is gorgeous, and being able to see multiple paths from the exit portal is brilliant and makes the level seem really expansive despite its mostly linear nature. The enemies almost look identical in the Reignited version, with the exception of the dog creature. I was pretty shocked to see they changed it to a pug or something along those lines.
I'm not a dog expert.
When I first saw it, I didn't even realize it was the same enemy. It's definitely an odd decision. When they transform, however, they're very similar to the original design. This level is absolutely stunning, but there isn't anything else really worth mentioning, so let's head on to Lofty Castle. Now, the main gimmick around Lofty Castle is...
I'm sorry, can we just pause for a minute?
Words cannot describe how much I love the music in this level. I generally have a preference for the music in Spyro 2 and 3 due to how thematic it is and of course nostalgia, but I cannot deny that Stuart Copeland did an incredible job with this soundtrack, and this is one of my favorite tracks in the trilogy. Now that we've begun with that positive note, we can now bring it all back down by me saying that I am not a fan of this level. Don't get me wrong, it's well designed and there's a lot of variety to it, but it's extremely open. This is usually a good thing, but every time I play this level, I manage to leave a gem lying around somewhere and I have to search absolutely everywhere for it. Again, it's not so much a fault of the level so much it is my general taste. However, I will commend it on the main feature of this level being that the goal is to free captured fairies in groups of 3 to help you progress through the level. Demon Cupids return in this level as well as Norks with balloons and these things. The Reignited version of this level is quite faithful to the original, and I absolutely love the castle design in the level, with the twisted points brilliantly representing the weird nature of the world it resides in. There's only one other thing worth pointing out, and it's quite a shame that I have to, but that is the music. I've thoroughly enjoyed Stefan's soundtrack so far, but most of what I love about the original track is gone here. The piano has been replaced with a bell-like keyboard effect. It's not necessarily bad, just a lot more subtle. If this was the intention of the arrangement, I'd be happy with it, but the overdriven guitar and drum beat says otherwise. A lot of the beauty and kick came from the piano, especially the bass notes, which are entirely absent in this version. It was always going to be a difficult task to top this track, but I feel like this is one of the few tracks that missed the mark for me. Next up, we have our final flight level, Icy Flight. You know the drill. In this level, we tackle lights, chests, trains, and a new addition, Norks and helicopter machines. The snowy mountains as well as the night setting both have that oddly magical feel.
Maybe I just feel that way because it's so close to Christmas.
It's a nice level, but mostly no different from what we've seen before, and this is a trait shared in the Reignited version. Other than the helicopter Norks shaking their fists at you, there really isn't much worth mentioning here, which is a shame considering it's our final flight level. And now we'll finish up the Dreamweaver's world with the boss level, me in French. If the Dreamweaver's world is considered the manifestation of dragons' dreams, then Jacques would have to be the manifestation of their nightmares. This level is completely different from what we've seen before, taking place in a volcanic area filled with nightmare creatures and fools.
Who I would consider one and the same, really.
This level features a lot of tricky gliding and quick movement as you need to attack the fools to raise or extend platforms necessary for completing the level. This level is actually quite difficult, making it one of my favorites in the game for the added challenge and intense aesthetic that we haven't quite seen in the game yet. Jacques himself appears very similar to a fool, but appears to be a jack-in-the-box, thus explaining his name. He bounces around and shoots boxes at you whilst you chase and attack him until you defeat him at the end of the level. Another easy boss, but the level that precedes him more than makes up for that. The jagged landscape in the Reignited version is absolutely menacing. Everything about it screams unsettling, frightening, and appropriately nightmarish. I absolutely love this take on the level, though I will point out one minor flaw in my opinion. The nightmare creatures are evidently creepy, but I find the added detail has actually taken the fear factor out of them for me. Part of the reason the original creatures were frightening to me was that the PS1 graphics made it hard to determine what I was witnessing. This is a similar reason why I find the original Silent Hill so creepy. The extra layer of mystery and letting your mind fill in the blanks was extremely effective for me, and I feel that the remaster, no matter what direction they went in, was always going to be a letdown in this regard. This isn't so much a fault in the game, as I'm not sure there was any way to nail that aesthetic with the updated graphics. I also want to point out how much I love the new design of Jacques himself. The wings are an addition I don't have much opinion on, but the look of his face is both comical and creepy at the same time, and makes him a much more interesting boss in my opinion. This level was a fantastic way to end off Dreamweaver's world, and with its completion, we once again visit the balloonist to head off to our final world, Nork Nexus, also known as Nasty's world. This world is extremely simple. It's an abandoned trash heap that the dragons have left Nasty Nork to call home. There is one dragon in the middle of the world surrounded by a portal and 3 mechanical dragon heads hiding the next portals. You must complete each level one by one to unlock the next, with the exception of the final portal that requires you to fully complete the game before you can open it. The dragons in this world are all dragons that Spyro has freed before, having attempted to confront Nasty only be trapped in Crystal again. In the Reignited trilogy, the level is essentially the same, however with the great addition of showing off parts of the upcoming levels in the distance, to show off the industrial areas that accompany the world. The first portal leads to Nork Cove, which takes place around the docks of an industrial area. Funny enough, the enemies appear very similar to the balloonist, which is a nice and curious detail, being attacked by potentially the same creatures who have been helping you throughout the game. This level introduces large enemies who throw metal and TNT barrels at Spyro that he can dodge or charge to launch back at them. This enemy type is a great way of utilizing Spyro's moves, and Insomniac seem to notice this because you'll be seeing this type of enemy again in the future. Another funny reference is this line when talking to Thomas, who for some reason has a new voice actor.
I always believed in you, Spyro.
You gotta believe!
You gotta do what?
You gotta believe!
You gotta do what?
This is a level that is great in design as always, but still managed to miss the mark for me. Most people might not have a problem with this level, but my two favorite features are gone. The Norks you battle through the level no longer resemble the balloonist, which is a shame, and the other issue is the way that Kenny performs the line.
You gotta believe!
I know it seems like a small and pointless gripe, but the change in pitch he does during the clip makes it seem like the reference was missed altogether, which is a bit of a letdown if you ask me. Despite all this, the level has great detail and still features the awesome mechanics mentioned before. And finally, we come to the last standard level in the original Spyro game, Twilight Harbor. The original level includes a large number of Norks carrying various high-powered weapons from grenades to assault rifles. This level is intense and appropriately difficult considering it's the final level of the game. The unforgiving nature makes for a brilliant end to a great game, and the level feels like it's ripped right out of an action movie. Charge off this ramp into this Nork and try not to feel like a bat.
This is going to upset a lot of people.
Now, before I get into the problem with this level, I want to point out that this level is still difficult and fun to play and is definitely still a relatively effective final level for the game.
However, not for a second did I think until the game was released that this level would not be changed.
The violent nature of the level has been toned down dramatically. Instead of grenades, Norks throw TNT, and instead of assault rifles, they shoot goo guns.
Now, I understand why this was changed, but the lack of intensity this presents just takes away from the level, and it just doesn't work thematically, in my opinion.
Toys for Bob have justified the design choice by stating that the factory is now a goo factory, which is definitely clear and dedicated, but It just makes the level far too goofy considering the intense nature of this final world. It's an odd choice that I feel just doesn't work in the final product. And now we come to the final boss of the game, Nasty Nork. The level begins with Nasty firing magic at you, whilst you must chase egg thieves carrying keys to the doors that prevent you from reaching him. Once you have these keys, you must now chase Nasty down as he flees to the other side of the level. The point isn't so much to catch him, but to stay close enough to give you enough time to flame him once he stops for a break. At this point, he runs into his base and leaps across platforms, slowly reclining that you must quickly travel over before you run out of time to save you from the ooze below. After flaming him again, Nasty Nork is defeated, and Spyro, being the monster he is, mocks him as he dies.
Toast, Nork.
As we saw in the opening cutscene, Nasty's appearance is somehow both more cartoonish and threatening at the same time in the Reignited trilogy. Other than this, the level looks and feels very faithful to the original. The industrial design and the sheer size of Nasty are both quite imposing, and really make for a great final boss in design, but somewhat lacking in terms of challenge, especially considering the difficulty of the levels beforehand. From here, we are greeted with a cutscene of Spyro celebrating his victory to the news crew that opened the game, with some added humour in the Reignited version, and we finish off the game with the ending credits. In the original, the credits are accompanied by swooping shots through all the levels, which is a great way of viewing what we just experienced from a news perspective. This would have been perfect for the Reignited trilogy considering the redesigns, but unfortunately we are treated to concept art instead. This is still a nice credit feature, but considering we can view concept art by collecting skill points, I found this to be pretty disappointing for the end of the game.
But wait, there's more.
After the credits, we are greeted by a final dragon who informs us that Nasty had stored all of his loot inside the final portal, which would only open when everything in the game had been collected. Since we've already done this, let's head into the final level, Nasty's loot. In this bonus level, Spyro can fly, but only up to the highest point he can reach naturally. To progress higher, Spyro must obtain keys from various egg thieves, both running and flying, to unlock gates leading to stairways that will allow him to ascend the level and thus ascend his flying height. The goal of the level is simply to collect the keys and gems until unlocking the door to Nasty's vault containing the last of the gems. The Reignited version is more or less the same, with a great addition of various posters and items within Nasty's vault, which I'll show you now. It's a great added personality to the level that is a much nicer way of finishing off the game, after which we are again shown the credits and a final cutscene hinting at the possible return of Nasty. Despite this, he doesn't appear in the next two games.
And with that, we've completed Spyro the Dragon, and whilst I must say, due to the lack of nostalgia, Spyro 1 in the original trilogy and the Reignited trilogy is my least favourite game, I think it's easily the best in the Reignited trilogy. Whilst there were one or two changes here or there in the game that I wasn't fond of, and the controls frustrated me a few times, there's just so much love and care put into this game, and there really just weren't that many flaws that I could pick from it. And when I compare it to Spyro 2 and 3, the amount of problems that I was able to find in that, it's just a really well polished game, and I feel like a lot of Toys for Bob's time was spent on Spyro 1. And for this reason, I absolutely loved the experience of replaying this game and seeing Toys for Bob's fresh new take on it. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look to the original game, and please let me know what you liked or disliked about it. I'm very curious to hear all your opinions about this game, what changes you were a fan of and what changes you weren't. Whether you agree with me or not, all opinions are valid, and I'm very curious to see what you all have to say about it. Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and make sure you subscribed if you want to see part 2 and part 3 of this series. I've got a lot more things to say about those games just because I found a lot more flaws, and also those are the games that really resonate with my childhood, so I just know a little bit more about the two. I definitely underestimated how much work this video was going to take, so I'm going to try to get part 2 out as soon as I can, but again, make sure you subscribe just so you don't miss out on any of it. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you real soon.